Hello, welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 23, a discussion with Patricia Surman. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Dr. Patricia Surman is a Yamaha performing artist and Fulbright scholar. She is the assistant professor of flute and director of woodwind studies at MSU Denver. A 21st century musician, Patricia has performed as a soloist and chamber musician in North and South America, Asia, and Europe. Please help me welcome Dr. Patricia Surman. Hello, Patricia. Thank you for being on the Flute 360 show.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Great. Well, I'd like to pick your brain a little bit about the job process because, 3 or 4 years ago, received your job in Denver, and you've also been on search committees for people who are applying to jobs. So you've got a great perspective on both angles.
Yes, thank you. I just finished my third year, so I guess I went through the interview process about 3.5 years ago, as well as being on several different searches.
Great. That's awesome. So what we're going to do is you can speak from both perspectives on the different topics, whatever you feel is best. So for the first episode of Series 4 that was launched a few weeks ago, we talked about the cover letter, or sometimes job announcements will describe it as the letter of interest or letter of application. Is there a specific tip or suggestion that you would like to share with the listeners about this cover letter?
Sure. I have a couple of just general suggestions that you could probably apply to any of the parts of the written application. Okay. I think that the first thing that is the most important thing throughout the job search process is really just to be as genuine as possible about yourself and your experiences. Because if you move on, if you're advanced in a job search, you're going to spend more and more time getting to know these people, and they're going to know who you are. So it's just going to save everybody a lot of time if you're as honest and genuine about yourself, because it's kind of corny to say, but it's, a job, it's kind of like a marriage, and you really want to be matched with the people that are right for you, as well as the people that you think you're right for. And so in order to do that, presenting yourself as you really are and who you really are, I think is the most important thing.
Oh, definitely. I completely agree. Being yourself, because like you said, you're going to be in this long-term relationship. And so if you are not phony, but if you're, not truly yourself throughout the beginning to the end of the process, then eventually your true colors or your true personality will eventually show through.
Right. Or if you somehow get a job that you might not like it, or it might not be the right job for you. And I know when I was going through my job search process, my mom would always say, well, the right fit will come along. And of course, that would just really frustrate me because it's just so easy to say. But the thing is, when you're working in the right environment for you, from everything from, your background and your performance ability and your teaching and all of that, but it's more just the right environment for you to thrive in, with the balance of research to teaching, the style of the university, some are more casual and some are more formal. And so finding a good fit for you is more important than finding a job, even though it feels different, of course. As the job searcher, you want that job so bad that that it's very easy to lose sight of what really matters.
Right.
And, you're going to waste a lot of time if you get a job that you really, really don't like, or that they don't like. It's just going to be so frustrating and painful once you have the job. And that's just not what you want in life.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing. And then on the other side of the coin, as somebody who's looked at applications, I think it's important to be as clear and impeccable with your language as possible. Things like typos are just going to be very distracting. And it's just so easy for a reviewer to look at things if they're looking at 100 or 150 applications on that very first pass through the applications. If they see typos or things that like formatting issues, it's going to catch their eye and they might not really even get to know who you really are. And that would be a real shame if you have a great application and you're a great match, but your materials just didn't quite look top notch. Then you might not get the results you want either for a silly reason.
Right. So yeah, just presenting your materials in a nice, neat package.
Right.
Yeah.
And that can be a little tricky these days since it's pretty much all electronic. And so we don't have a lot of control over things. I highly recommend, instead of submitting a Word document, to submit a PDF. So that way you have a little more control over your formatting and things like that. If you made something look really nice and then you submit it to some system that you have to upload it, and Word documents can get reformatted, or if the person who printed it out, their margins are different on their computer or their screen, it could do all sorts of wacky things.
Yeah.
And it's just distracting to if you're trying to look at 100 applications and I, as somebody who's been on the other side, I know how much time and energy each individual has put into their application. So I want to make sure that I'm not distracted by some weird formatting thing,
Right.
So I think PDF is the way to go. And, just think about what the package looks like from the outside. Or something that's also really helpful is if you have access to a friend or colleague or teacher who has already been on job searches, have them take a look at it as if they were reviewing it and just have them give you their impressions of it.
Yeah, just getting a fresh set of eyes to examine the materials is always beneficial because you've been staring at it forever.
Right.
Yeah.
When I was in graduate school, I had a job as an assistant editor I went to the University of North Texas, so the UNT Press. And one of the things that my editor taught me was that when you're editing a book, that you should also read it backwards. So you want to read things back to front because then you catch typos and things like that, as opposed to reading it just front to back.
Right.
So that's something like that is always a good idea. I'm sure if you just Google editing tips, you can find plenty of great tips, but it just helps to have everything in tip-top shape and looking really nice.
That could apply very easily to our practicing, right? Not always starting at the top of the piece, but working backwards to the front.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I love doing that.
Yeah.
I like to, especially things like etudes or things that are very technical, to just, build it up one measure at a time from the back to the front. In fact, I had a pianist friend told me to do that once to work on memorizing, to work from the back to the front. It really helps to break down, to find out exactly where your memory breaks are happening. So yeah, great.
Yeah.
I can apply it to anything.
Yeah, I like that connection. So speaking of this package, this nice, neat little package that we're presenting to the committee, that first element is the cover letter. So I know, like, when mentors have guided me through my cover letters, the one thing that seems to always come up in conversation is the fact that you want to tailor that cover letter for that university, because each university has different goals and philosophies, and you want to make sure, and they're also asking for different aspects of the teaching job. So some jobs will say, we would like the candidate to teach flute and music theory. And in that cover letter, you want to demonstrate how you can fulfill that requirement.
Right. I think that's very important. So I guess when the job posting comes up, you should check out their website, check out who the teachers are that you'd be working with, how you could fit in with them. If you see any kind of connections, like suppose there's a faculty woodwind quintet, then you might want to mention that you were, you played in a woodwind quintet for your master's or whatever, and, if there's a specific teaching requirements that they have and you have experience with it, then you definitely want to mention that. And if you don't have actual experience teaching a class, but maybe you took several classes on that subject in your graduate school, that might be something worth mentioning. Or, I like to describe, I'm a music theory enthusiast. So yeah, if a job came along that I was applying for that said flute and theory, I definitely would want them to know how much I love music theory. And I love music theory because it makes me a better player. So to me, I see that as a very integrated and connected thing, that the theory skills are going to make my playing better. And so the theory skills are going to help my students to understand their playing much better too. So, that might be something you might want to mention.
No, that's great. Perfect. Is there anything else with the cover letter that you see, I don't know, like possible candidates for these job postings, you being on the search committee? Do you see like a common mistake that most applicants make?
I think that there's certain things that could happen that are awkward and that I have seen actually happening more. I think lately, just, the job search world is just so competitive. But I think sometimes people have a partner that's also, in the field, and they want to have that person get a job as well. Some people mention that in the letter.
Oh, wow.
Or my husband's a music theorist, and he knew of some people who were husband and wife music theorists, and they applied together to one job.
Oh, no.
And that's probably not going to work. So I would stick with the conventional, and even, let's say your wife is from Toledo and you're applying for a job and it's in Toledo. You probably don't want to say, and my wife is from here, please hire me because, we want to have built-in babysitting for our kids with their grandparents. Yeah. I think I would stay away from too much personal.
Okay.
It could really turn people off.
Right.
It could resonate with someone, but I'd say out of 100 people, 99 are going to be turned off, and one person is going to say, "Oh, great, we should hire this person. They're going to be a great fit." The other thing that I think is really important about the cover letter is that the reason for the cover letter is to tell your committee about things that haven't been conveyed in the CV. And so you want to somehow, if there's things that maybe, it's a laundry list of everything you've ever done. So you might have mentioned it, but if there's particular things that you really want to highlight about yourself as a performer, educator, researcher, maybe more philosophically, that would really belong in the cover letter as opposed to the CV. So if you just think of your CV as almost like a diary of everything you've been up to for the past, since graduate school,
right?
then the cover letter is somehow explaining to them why, if you're really into Messiaen, let's say, and, you could say maybe your CV reflects that by saying you wrote your dissertation on Messiaen, but as part of that process, you went to the Messiaen archives in Paris or wherever they are. I don't know. And, you did these performances and you've studied these pieces. If you could somehow convey the motivation behind your interest in research, I think that would be really great, as well as your motivation behind your teaching and performing, so that people can understand. The cover letter is for them to kind of understand what makes you tick, as opposed to what you've been up to and what you've achieved.
Oh, I like that. I just like the difference between, like you said, the resume or the CV is your laundry list, and then the cover letter, you get to dive in a little bit more.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. So the next part of this package, since we've started touching on it a little bit, is the CV. So with the CV, of course, you want to have the most current project or employer that you've been working with at the top. One thing that Dr. Lisa Garner-Santa had me revamp my CV was different areas. So like education, and then go through that umbrella of education and then list my degrees there. And then like the next umbrella, possibly like creative projects. And then the last one, service. Do you suggest something similar just so that way it's organized neatly?
Definitely. I think that you need to have, if you think about your CV, it's almost like an outline of a paper that you're writing, that you never have to really write a narrative. Thank goodness, because that would take a lot of work. So if most people have obviously, their name on the top, their name and contact information, and make sure, this sounds really silly, but make sure that you have your current contact information, the best way to be contacted on the top of the cover letter or on top of the CV, on top of both of them, really. So then, you have your education, and working backwards chronologically. I think within education, if you have, some people like to list their GPA, or if they graduated summa cum laude or whatever, list that. And then under each degree, let's say you have a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. Under your doctoral degree, you want to have your dissertation project title listed. I think that's helpful, as well as if you did a master's thesis, you could put that there. Or, sometimes people do like a bachelor's honors thesis. If you did something like that, go ahead and just put the title of it right there underneath the school. So it'll say, University of whatever. And then shift it over one tab, basically a bibliographic citation of your dissertation title.
I like that. So they don't even really have to fish for it later, like in publications.
Right. And in publications, you'll probably have that listed again. Although you don't want to have too much duplication of listing. I think in this case, it might be okay. But generally, you want to make things make sense to the reader. Like if they're, reading about you and they see that you have your doctorate, and, the natural next question is going to be, oh, I wonder what they wrote their dissertation on.
Right. Yeah.
So,
what's their little field of expertise?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I know there's lots of different ways that dissertations happen. It could be a recording project or a project of some sort, but just a little something about it right there. And then CVs, obviously for flutists, are complicated because we're going to present our research, which could be, if you're doing a lot of actual research and writing, it could just be research. When you switch over to working in the tenure track, your research is everything that you do professionally. It's your performing and your writing and any kind of research that you're doing. It could take the place. It's not just a book or an article. It could be a CD if you made a recording, or a large performance. So it gets a little complicated. And so I think when you're thinking about like the research portion, so basically at the top, you would have your education, and then you would have research and service. And that basically reflects the three things that you're going to be doing in your job: teaching, research, and service. Some schools call research professional activities, and that might be a better way for us to think about it, because your professional activities are wider. And so when you have your research heading, you might even have a subheading that says, or maybe you have a professional activities heading and then a subheading that says performances, research. And so you have it broken up into those two different areas. And then depending on how old you are in your process, things get more and more complicated. So the more you perform, the longer the CV gets. And at some point, so I know for myself, at some point, I just had performances listed. But as things got longer and more complicated, I ended up breaking it up into three categories: international, national, and regional. So just to make it a little clearer so the audience could read it and understand exactly what I've been up to. If you see a really prominent job, one of the things it'll often say is something like looking for a performer with an international reputation or internationally established career. And so I think if that's what you see in your job search, you want to be able to reflect that in your CV. So make it very obvious to the readers that you have that particular facet that they're looking for.
Right. So as I'm listening to you talk about this list getting longer and longer, at what point do you say, okay, I'm just going to cut that from the CV? Do you have like a general, like, X amount of years rule or no?
Yeah, I don't have a rule about that, but I think that if you just graduated, you're obviously going to have things from your schooling in your CV.
Right.
But at some point, maybe that isn't so appropriate anymore. And I can't really remember exactly when I cut that out. But at some point, I just looked at my CV and I thought, oh, it's pretty ridiculous for me to have master's recital on here when I have 45 other important recitals,
right.
So I think you should just use your best judgment. And when you feel that the time is appropriate, based on your individual experiences, you could take those things out. But I would say, unless you won something very big, like a very, very large prize of some sort in a bachelor's degree, you want to limit it to graduate and above if you just graduated.
Okay.
And, I think the same rule of thumb stays in place. If, let's say you won like the NFA Young Artist Competition as a freshman in college, you're going to always have that on your CV.
Yeah.
So it'll fall farther and farther down to the bottom. But on your cover letter, you might have, I'm a young artist winner as well as blah, 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 blah. But even though it's going to be buried very, very far down the list chronologically, because the CV should always be chronological. And the reason is, I guess, that the people that are reading the CV, they want to know what you're up to now. And if you think about your career, let's say, look, you finish your doctorate and 10 years later, your research interests probably would have changed dramatically. And so the people looking at it want to know what you're interested in now. As the most important thing, I wouldn't be surprised to see things shift in many different ways. And some things that you were interested in as, I don't know, a high schooler, you're probably still interested in. But I bet that the general trajectory could shift very dramatically.
Sure.
I mean, I know there was a time period when I was very interested in piccolo, for instance, and I did a lot of performing and research on piccolo. And right now I'm more interested in American music. I guess that doesn't exclude piccolo, but it's just a different shift. And I'm starting to explore some other topics that are completely different than that. So I think as you develop as a performer and teacher, your interests are going to develop as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. So then the third aspect of this package that we're presenting to the search committee, I've seen a lot in job postings currently, are not just recordings of recitals, but also teaching videos. So as a search committee member, what are you looking for, other than, of course, like you said earlier in the episode, being yourself, being genuine? What are you looking for in that teaching video?
So I think that the teaching video, this is like the most awkward thing. If you've ever tried to make a teaching video, it's just very awkward.
It is.
But I think that this is something to say about both recordings and the teaching video. You want to have the highest quality production value you can, because you're going to be competing against people who are submitting professional quality recordings. Some jobs specify that they have to be live recordings or live video. And whether it's a live video or a fully produced CD quality recording, many of the people are going to have professional quality recordings. That's not to say that if you make a teaching video on your iPhone and edit it in GarageBand that you're never going to get a job.
Right.
But there is this sort of wow factor that I think that we as humans, like psychologically, just can't really 100% get over.
Right.
You know, if we see something that's top quality, imagine, you know, somebody watching 100 videos. It's just going to be human nature that the ones with the best production value are going to just stick out in your mind. And since you're trying to convey, the most important thing about the teaching video or the performance video is you as a teacher or you as a performer, you don't want to let other things distract you. I mean, such as I'm actually thinking now a little more about some competitions that I've judged, and such as extraneous sounds. And it might seem so minor to you, but it'll be very, very distracting to the person on the other end. I tried to record a teaching video in my office once at my former university, and my next door neighbor was teaching voice lessons. And when I went back and looked at it, I could hear their singing in the background. So that obviously wasn't going to work.
Right.
And it would have just been very distracting to somebody listening.
Yeah.
Which I guess could be good or bad. You know, they could say, you know, I can imagine the committee sitting around, but what about that one that had, you remember the one with the vocal exercises in the background?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. But chances are it's going to be just frustrating to them. So you want to think about getting a really clean take, which is the same approach as you would do if you're submitting a recording for a competition. And then, of course, they can see you. So you want to look presentable and you want your student to look presentable. And I think that it can be very tricky. I tried to record teaching videos by just like letting the camera run all day on my lessons before.
Oh, sure.
And, you know, it was that time of the semester where, I don't know, I think there was a big band concert the day before. And, you know, most of my students came in unprepared that day. And so, you know, I was like, I had these great intentions. I'd thought about what Susie needed to learn, and she hadn't practiced any of the things I asked her to. So, you know, when you're recording a teaching video, you might want to ask somebody, you know, a student of yours or a flutist that you know, and explain to them what it's for, and, you know, give them a very particular assignment. I think most people want the teaching video to be about 15 minutes long, or 10 to 15 minutes. And so that's, of course, not as long as a normal lesson. And so in that teaching video, you might just be teaching one concept on one piece, or a couple of concepts on one piece. So I would limit it. I wouldn't say, oh, let's make a teaching video of somebody playing the Prokofiev sonata. And so 20 minutes later, they're done playing their Prokofiev. And then you say some great, brilliant things.
Right.
And, you know, I think that the listeners will be tuned out by then, or they'll just be like really impressed with the Prokofiev sonata and be happy about the student and think, oh, we need to have that student at our school. But, you know,
right.
You want to somehow capture their attention at the very beginning. I don't know if you've ever looked at the YouTube analytics, but you could look at analytics, and I think they say most people lose interest within the first 30 seconds. So
sure. Yeah.
So it's very hard. Like, I mean, of course, these people on the other end are supposed to sit down and watch the whole thing. That's their job. But you want to get their interest early on and plan out what you're going to do and present it in an organized manner. And when you're recording a teaching video, maybe be prepared to record the same teaching lesson 5 times.
Oh, that makes sense.
I know it's like totally awkward because you're there with your student. You're like, okay, let's have this lesson again. And to have them stay as natural and relaxed as possible, as well as you stay as natural and relaxed as possible, it could be very difficult. It's just an awkward thing. And then I think also, we as performers think about ourselves in terms of, we're used to listening to ourselves in terms of our flute sound, but we don't spend a lot of time listening to ourselves talk.
Right.
And so it could be very stressful when you go back and listen to it, or disappointing, let's say, if you realize, oh, I say all the time, or I have this funny movement I'm making with my left side of my mouth every time I say, blow more air. I don't know. So you want to record yourself and look at yourself and analyze like how your body language is enhancing your message or detracting from your message, how your words are enhancing or detracting from your message before you even step into like just make a teaching video. So
yeah, definitely. And that kind of reminds me of one of the teaching videos that I recently put together for a job application. And I watched it back and I decided not to use it because I noticed that the playing was good, the content was good, the interaction was good. But I noticed that because I was so aware of the video camera, I never really made eye contact with my student. And that really bothered me. And so like body language is a huge thing, the nonverbal. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.